What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Sports Talk with me, Tyson the Trainer. Now, today we are going to be talking about the importance of sodium because, especially being an athlete, like sodium is such an important electrolyte for you. And I think a lot of people undervalue the utilization of it. We hear so much about how sodium can be linked to blood pressure. You probably have heard about that. Or you've got to watch how much sodium you have. And can be true for certain people of the general population. But for someone who's an athlete, who's sweating a lot, who's using a lot of muscle contraction, you're going to actually need to have a good amount of sodium in your diet. Now the thing with sodium that I want to say first of all is it's a little bit of variation between each person. So I can't say exactly how much sodium you're going to need. And if you want to be as accurate as possible and you have the money, you should probably go and do a sweat test so you can actually find out how much sodium is coming out with your sweat. Because a fun fact, some people, when they sweat, they don't sweat out as much. Some people are salty sweaters. So you're not going to taste yourself, but you could actually taste your sweat to see how salty there is. And there are other people who sweat out less sodium, So it's actually going to be very person dependent too. And usually what will happen is we'll also sweat out a little bit of magnesium and potassium, but nowhere near as much when it comes to sodium. So it would be good if you do have the money and the financial, or money I should just say, to be able to get a sweat test. I personally haven't done one myself, but I kind of know how to regulate my sodium quite well just due to watching my blood pressure and stuff like that. And it's something you guys can be doing too, right? So when it comes to sodium, the reason it is so important, especially for people who are athletes, it helps with nutrient absorption. So sodium in the stomach does help with a little bit of nutrient absorption. It helps with muscle contraction overall, so sodium was a big player in that. So like electrolytes causing electrical current is what we're trying to say here for those contractions, and especially for neurological health too. So you want to make sure that you have the right signals sending to your body, and then also avoiding fatigue overall. So having sodium is quite important for a lot of different functions in the body, What they've actually found is people who aren't hydrated enough or aren't having as much sodium actually had a decrease in their performance by a good chunk, So making sure you are constantly hydrated and not just from water, like we've kind of talked about before, is such an important thing. Because making sure you are getting the right amount of sodium for the day to help with your performance overall. And one thing to do with blood plasma too, so like plasma volume in your body. So when you're having more sodium, it's actually going to reduce the amount of how hard your body has to work to pump blood through the system. So, if you just want to have better overall capacity for exercise, better overall, overall lower fatigue to be able to perform better, then making sure sodium in our diet is going to be important, Now, when I'm saying sodium, I am saying salt. They are basically the same thing. But, if you have a teaspoon of table salt, it's a different amount of what's going to be for sodium. So it's actually going to be quite a fair bit of sodium in table salt, right? So first we have to differentiate between the two so you know kind of what we're talking about here. So sodium is basically, like table salt is made up of sodium, So basically, when we go to look at the sodium content of our diet overall, usually it's going to be logged within food if you're going to track with MyFitnessPal or something like that, which will tell you your sodium content. But then also in regards to saying that, we have to also try and account somewhat for the salt that's being put in our food. You can look up equations and stuff like that to find out that. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how much salt would be in a little shaker and things like that, but it's something we kind of do need to be aware of, right? So as a general rule, recommendation that they have is to stay under 2,300 milligrams a day. This is for normal people. Okay, for you definitely want to be having more than that. So firstly, what you want to go and get checked is your blood pressure. Is your blood pressure okay? If you're an athlete, you're probably going to maintain quite a relatively good weight, probably a leaner weight. Your blood pressure is going to be quite good. So if it is good, we want to start looking at your sodium intake. And ideally, we want to try and push that sodium intake as high as possible, okay? So the higher you can have your sodium intake without a few different side effects, which I'll talk to you about, the higher we can have that, the better you're probably going to perform overall, all right? So it's a little bit of trial and error to find out what's going to work best for you. So when we start to increase our sodium intake first, you are going to hold a little bit more water because sodium will pull water towards it, So the more sodium and salt we have in a diet, the more water we will be pulling towards that. And that's what people may notice when you have a high salty meal full of carbohydrates, you go out for takeaway, you wake up the next day, you feel puffy and bloated. That's because of the sodium, the carbohydrates, and it's a processed food overall, right? But with sodium, what we're trying to do here is increase it to not make you puffy, to not make you feel like you're holding water retention, but to make sure it's helping you with your performance overall. So firstly, you want to start tracking your food and look at how much sodium you're roughly having every day. Let's say it's 2,500 milligrams a day. we want to bump that up to about 3,000 milligrams a day first, So a 500 milligram increase, you can do that with changing your foods to choosing more sodium containing foods, or this is when you should add a little bit of table salt. And so if I say 500 milligrams, I'd probably say like a little bit of I'm going like this, the salt shaker, or just tapping it, whatever it's going to be, just all over the food. So each meal, adding a little bit of extra salt to each meal would be a simple way to increase that. Is that going to be 500 milligrams? I couldn't tell you. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less, but we're just guesstimating here, okay? So you start with increasing it by a little bit. So it's like, all right, I'm still tracking my same food on MyFitnessPal. I'm just going to add in a little bit of extra table salt, and I'm just going to say that's 3,000 milligrams. Then again, if you have a blood pressure monitor, check your blood pressure, or go and see your doctor again. I would suggest just going and get a blood pressure monitor so you can always keep it in check, so you know it's in a safe range overall. And basically from there, what you can do, always keep testing that. If your blood pressure's fine, if you haven't put on extra weight, you may put on a little bit of scale weight, but nothing crazy. And if you don't feel bloated or puffy or anything like that, and there's no negative side effects. So usually what you'll start to notice for some people having side effects, more dry mouth. For me, I actually get not skin, but the top of your mouth that starts to peel if I have too much sodium. So that's a good indicator for me. You sort of be if you're getting headaches or anything like that, because that could also be blood pressure increasing. So just noticing how you are feeling in general with the extra sodium intake to kind of monitor how you're going. And if you hit 3,000, you're still good, bump it up by another 200 to 300 milligrams to get to that 3,300 mark. And you're going to find a place where you're like, all right, this is just too much salt for me. My palate can't handle as much sodium, or you're going to get to a point where you're going to find out it's a little bit too much for you. So this is why we can kind of personalize it based on that. And then you're going to find out this sweet spot. So for me, mine's at 4,000 milligrams a day. For a lot of my female clients, they're at about 3,200 milligrams a day. For my male clients who are a bit heavier and who do one of them does marathon running, he's at 6,000 milligrams a day because he can have a lot. So it's going to be very person dependent, and you can just muck around with these amounts as you kind of titrate up your sodium to find out what's going to be best for you and how you can handle it overall, And what you will start to notice is that you're performing better. You'll have better muscle contractions, you'll have better pumps. If you're someone who gets lightheaded when you stand up and stuff like that, that's going to be eliminated. There's going to be a huge difference overall for you to be able to notice that increase in sodium intake, and it's going to be all beneficial for you. You'll be able to perform better, like I said, muscle contraction better, less neurological fatigue. Everything's going to be better for you. So trying to find out, what's going to be a good sweet spot for you with sodium is going to be the best thing. Okay, so again, start where you are, measure it, start to slowly increment over time. Now, when it comes to choosing sodium or salt, I just say choose iodized salt. Right? So you've probably heard about pink Himalayan sea salt and all this thing. It's actually just bullshit. It's just a fucking marketing scheme, and we actually want to have iodine in our body. So making sure you get salt that's iodized salt is actually going to be a better choice for you than getting pink Himalayan natural fucking salt. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys too. So in regards to all this, making sure our sodium is increasing, one other thing you have to be aware of is potassium. All right, so as that sodium increases, we want to make sure we're having a high amount of potassium too, because they're kind of like a little bit of a balancing equation there. And with increased sodium could potentially come the increased risk in blood pressure, like I've said. So increasing that potassium as you go up, it's also going to be beneficial. So what you can do, have more potassium containing foods, bananas, off the top of my head, bananas, spinach, avocados, I think beetroot. I can't think off the top of my head, but you can look up, I should have checked this beforehand, but you guys can look up potassium containing foods, and you want to make sure you're having more of that in your diet too. Because ideally, you want to have a 1-to-3 ratio, or a 1-to-2 ratio. One for every milligram of sodium, you want to have 2 milligrams of potassium. So if you get into that 3,000 milligram of sodium, you want to have about 6,000 milligrams of potassium. Now that's quite a high amount of potassium, so you can take potassium supplements to get there. I wouldn't recommend it. So when it comes to obviously, taking supplements with potassium, it's very, it could be a dangerous thing because you don't want to have too much potassium either, as that can also cause cardiovascular risk. So we try and get as much potassium as we can with food. And if there's a huge gap between potassium and sodium, if you're not having blood pressure issues, it's not too bad. But even if you're not having blood pressure issues, it may be something to talk about with your sports coach or to a doctor about getting potassium pills, because explain to them, I am having high amounts of sodium. I want to be able to have more potassium in my diet, and they know the reason why potassium is important, especially for your overall health too. But again, if your blood pressure isn't being affected, it may not be that important, but I would still just check with the doctor just to be 100% clear, because at the end of the day, if that is going up, there is recommendations about trying to have a 1-to-2 ratio of potassium to sodium. So maybe trying to follow that as you kind of increase your sodium and potassium over time to see what's going to be happening, and you will notice again, with both of those, you'll just notice way better feeling, better muscle contraction, performance is going to be overall better, you're going to feel better, just everything's going to be a bonus. I've had a lot of clients who have been low sodium, especially females who have low blood pressure, who get dizzy and stuff like that. When they start to increase their sodium intake, they notice such a big difference for themselves, and they just salt everything because they know how important it is, especially when doctors haven't really talked to them about it before, or they've checked their blood pressure and oh, it's low, it's fine, but low is not always fine, especially when you're getting head spins and stuff like that. So that's just a quick episode on sodium. I hope that makes sense. If you guys have any questions, as always, message me on Instagram at Tyson the Trainer with 2 R's, and I'll speak to you guys next time.